Hello, and thank you for joining in on today's training. Heart & Solutions is a proud provider of CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below to find and take your quiz.
So today we are here for another episode or installment of You Needed Training. Today we have Jordan Prebys, who is here to share with us all of her knowledge. The training today is Child-Centered Play Therapy in Small Spaces, a primer, designed to help clinicians who work with children to understand vital importance of using nonverbal therapy for children, such as in child-centered play therapy, as well as to address the challenges of small office spaces, which I'm sure many of us have had to deal with at some point or another. Now, I would like to introduce Jordan. So Jordan Prebys is a child and adult therapist in private practice with over 20 years of experience in the field of counseling and social services. She is a registered play therapist supervisor, as well as a registered sand play practitioner. She owns her own private practice, A Place Within, for counseling and sand/play therapy, which is located in DeKalb, Illinois. Jordan has worked with clients in private practice, agency, community, outpatient, inpatient, school, and home settings. So a wealth of experience and knowledge. She also speaks Spanish and has worked with Spanish speakers since the inception of her career. She served on the Diversity Committee for Sand Play Therapists of America and is also chair of the Scholarship Subcommittee. She is a child-centered play therapist as well as a Jungian-oriented and incorporates expressive therapies in her practice. So again, a wealth of knowledge and experience that we can glean from today. As I said prior to the training, Jordan, thank you so much for being here today. I am super excited to learn everything that you have to teach us and for the knowledge that you're willing to share. I do not want to take up any more of your time, however, so I'm going to hand it over to you and I'm going to let you get started.
Thank you so much for that very, very nice introduction. I definitely appreciate it. I hope everybody can bear with me as I work my best with Zoom. So let me work on sharing my screen. And I also want to let everybody know, let's see, that I will probably not be able to see you all while I'm doing this just because of the nature of it. So I know you can put questions in the chat. Feel free to stop me if I'm missing something. So play from start. Okay. And I'm going to try to move some things. And can everybody see that now? Okay, sounds good. Like I said, stop me if you need me to stop anywhere. So yeah, I am Jordan. This is my training, child-centered play therapy in small spaces. It's a primer. I am passionate about play. I am passionate about nonverbal therapies and expressive ways of working with clients. I believe that child-centered play therapy is the best way of working with children. And even if you don't want to do child-centered play therapy, I feel like it's the basic nuts and bolts of how to work with children and is sort of that foundational grounding place. And just like Carl Rogers is really the foundation of how to do counseling, I think CCPT is the foundation of how to work with children. And I'm also reminded of the importance sometimes of returning to the basics. I just think of, about even just sand play. I've probably taken introduction courses multiple times, even after 10 years, because I can always learn something from other therapists. There's always a new perspective. So I just ask that for some of you that, maybe have heard some of this before, just taking kind of a, just a new cap of what might come in. And unfortunately, even though some people are not maybe interested in working with kids, when we end up in agencies or private practices where we're the employee and not our own business, they're going to kind of give you what they need to give you. And so it's going to probably come everybody's way. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way necessarily, but it is that way. So that's just the reality. And then on top of that, they'll give you a really small office. So like, we want a child therapist. Here's your small office. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have to share that with so-and-so who's an adult therapist too. So I think there's a lot of challenges when we get out into the real world of counseling and the limitations of work environments. So that's kind of why I found these things frustrating as a developing therapist. And that's kind of what inspired me to create this. Oh, great. Now it's not going to let me do it, is it? Okay, there we go. So you already gave the introduction. I started in the field of social services like in 1999, and I got my degree in 2005. So that's kind of how long I've been doing it. I'll briefly kind of mention the learning objectives. We're going to look at the developmental theory and the importance of play, especially. We're going to look at Axeline's 8 basic principles. We're going to look at a therapeutically balanced play kit that is small, whether you have to stick it in the corner of your room or you're traveling, as I used to do too, where you're going around town with your stuff. We're going to talk about, actually, I said 2, but I'm going to throw in 3 formative theorists in the development of this theory of play therapy. And also, if we have time, I don't know that we will, I'm going to try to get into Van Fleet's 4 skills of CCPT. As we start, so why play, right? I want to look at why play. And Gary Lander says that play is the most natural thing that children do. And if adults want to make significant emotional contact with children, they must understand the meaningful messages in play. And so I want to start not with a play therapist, but with Stuart Brown. I think he's very, very important. So first, let's talk about play. And he is really the pioneer of play. He has a very long and impressive career as an internal medicine doctor and a psychiatrist. And he came to research play after he was appointed by the governor of Texas to investigate a mass shooting that happened at the Texas Tower in Austin, Texas. And this was in 1966. And what happened was the shooter actually killed his wife and his mother that day. And then he climbed the tower at the university and killed 17 more people and injured 41. So the governor set up a task force to understand why. And so his time on that task force, what he found in his research, he found surprising. And what he found was that a severe deprivation of play by the shooter in childhood by an abusive father. So he started to see this absence of play, which he found interesting. And then he continued in his research in the Texas prison system with similar findings, that the absence of play in the offenders' childhoods was as important of a factor in predicting their crimes as a single factor. And so after extensive research of about 8,000 individuals and assessing their play profiles, he concluded that people, this is a quote, people with play in their lives were usually successful, and people with play deprivation had dangerous long-term consequences. He also, in studying abused kids at risk for antisocial personality disorder, found that their likelihood to commit violence was diminished through play. So this actually was really astounding for him. This led him to leave his clinical practice and to go study play in the animal kingdom. And in 2006, he actually founded the National Institute of Play as an effort to both research play and with the hopes of integrating play research so that the field of human play is a credentialed discipline in the scientific community. And one of the really fascinating things that he did, some of his stuff, he kind of worked with Jane Goodall in his career. He actually had this also done in National Geographic, and that is a fascinating study on a Canadian Eskimo dog and a polar bear playing in the wild. And we learned that my links are not playing audio. So Colleen, if you could pull up that first link, it's a little bit of a dramatic video, but it's really fascinating, I think, and helps illustrate the concepts of play.
Dog breeder and Churchill resident Brian Ledoux keeps 150 sled dogs on the shores of Hudson Bay.
Just like a complete city of dogs.
Brian keeps his dogs on a spit of land jutting out into the sea.
It's isolated and the best place to keep Eskimo dogs on Earth.
It's isolated and it's controllable, except for the other locals. You see, one day in 1992, Brian watched helplessly as a starving polar bear strolled onto his land and headed straight for his dogs. He knew all too well that bears regularly kill and eat dogs when they come into contact.
When I first seen things playing out, I did have great concerns. I was frightened and I wasn't sure what to do.
He was unable to move a muscle as half a ton of malnourished mega-predator closed in on his faithful companions. Then, as these photos show, something truly unbelievable happened. The pair began to play.
It is extraordinary to see them play together. Actually, you got a privileged position when you're right in the front row seat and you're watching them, and they're only like meters away from you.
Amazingly, this particular bear started an annual ritual, returning to visit the dogs each year just before the sea freezes.
So I just wanted to share that just because it's kind of a fascinating little study that he did. And so, taking more from Stuart Brown, play is a profound biological process. And this is pretty much agreed upon by neuroscientists, developmental biologists, researchers from all disciplines, social scientists, and psychologists. And play for many animals promotes survival. It shapes the brain. It increases intelligence. It increases adaptability. It fosters empathy. It helps in higher animals. It fosters empathy, and it helps them make complex social groups possible. And in humans, play lies at the core of creativity and innovation. So play is a very primal activity. It is preconscious and preverbal. It arises out of ancient biological structures that existed before our consciousness or our ability to speak. And he speaks to the properties of play. And the properties of play are that it is apparently purposeless. So it's done for one's own sake. It's voluntary. There's an inherent attraction to play. When playing, we have a freedom from time. Time seems to just slip away. We have a diminished consciousness of ourselves, so we're not so aware of ourselves. We become engrossed into this other space of play. There's potential for improvisation with play, and there's a continuation desire, meaning we want to continue to do it because it's fun. And he says that what academic and clinical research has taught him, that it is intensely pleasurable, it energizes us and enlivens us, it eases our burdens, it renews our natural sense of optimism and opens us up to new possibilities. And as a culture, I feel like we really tend to trivialize and dismiss play, but I'm here to really challenge that idea, that play is so important. And some quotes from Brown's work that I love is that the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. Play is called recreation because it makes us new again. It recreates us and our world. And this is one of my favorite quotes. Play is nature's greatest tool for creating new neural networks and for reconciling cognitive difficulties. In sort of an era of so much cognitive therapy, I love this quote. So I'm just going to read it again. Play is nature's greatest tool for creating new neural networks in our brains and for reconciling cognitive difficulties. And when we play, dilemmas and challenges will naturally filter through the unconscious mind and work themselves out. And sometimes when a situation is really heading south, A moment of imaginative play is the only thing that provides enough distance to see the way out of predicament. And play is also the mother of invention. So years ago, the Smithsonian Institute had an exhibit on play as really being a part of innovation and invention, and how scientists use play in figuring things out. It highlighted the woman who discovered Kevlar, which became the Kevlar vest. So I went looking for that material a couple years ago when I made this initial training, and I was really excited to see that now it has its own center at the Smithsonian. It's the Lemelson Center at the National Museum of American History. And I wanted to share another video from child scientist to playful inventor. And I just want to warn you, like, the quality of it is not great. You'll hear it great. It's just that it's like done before HD. And so as you see it, it's going to be a little funny for our eyes, but the content is so good.
Whoa, it is Children are making up theories of the world, going out and testing those theories, doing experiments to explore those theories. And that testing and experimentation is what we see when we see play.
Go get a baby upstairs.
Even the very youngest children are already doing some of the same things that scientists are doing.
If play is exploration and gives us license to try new ideas, work in many ways is application of that understanding. It's hard for me as an inventor to think about being effective in my work without being involved in the process of play, which really enables me to work at playing with ideas.
I mean, I really don't know if this is a good idea or not. You just have to let me know. That was the moment, is when I first saw the first hand cycle, I kept thinking, how much does that thing weigh? Or think if it was rear wheel drive, or think if you were sitting lower.
Let's go ride.
I could tell that I could make a better one.
I would say that all of the ideas on every level come out of a kind of daydreaming, imagining. Where does the idea start? I mean, there's an initial idea, there's an attempt to work on it, there are problems, the solutions come from the daydreaming about the problem. And it really is playing with the materials.
When children are finding out about the world, they're using a lot of the same kinds of fundamental basic techniques that scientists use, or for that matter, that inventors use when they're trying to be creative and find out about the world.
Play is one of the ways that we begin to understand the nature and shape of the world. This is really a prime occupation of children. What is this place that we've been brought into? How does it work? What happens when we try this? What happens when we be mischievous?
To me, school was questionable, but summer break, those 3 months of the summer, was a lot of fun. And we would get together and build tree forts, or, go dam a river somewhere, or, just tear apart Mom's washing machine and try to fix it. And sometimes it got back together and sometimes it didn't. When you play and go way out in a certain direction, it pulls the center out of what people are doing. And so it allows you to come up with innovative ideas.
You close your eyes, and you flip over one, and you see if you get a match. Okay. And you do while closing your eyes. Okay.
Young children invent things without anyone ever instructing them to do so.
We were out watching them the other day, and they were, to make orange juice, they were taking oranges and they were smashing them with their boots and hammers and everything, and that was orange juice.
One of the things that we always say is that it's not that children are little scientists, it's that scientists are big children.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah.
They've accepted it. How can we make it better, cheaper, quick?
Scientists actually are the few people who, as adults, get to have this protected time when they can just explore, play, figure out what the world is like.
In many ways, all of my engineering training has come through just tinkering and playing. I've never had any engineering courses, and I think that's probably a good thing, because solving the problems on my own has led to, I think, the nature of my art. Whereas if I had to learn how to make machines in a machine shop, then I would have sort of been told how to make things, and then they would look that way. So I never knew how to make things, and just kind of came up with it.
Sometimes I have to realize that whenever I feel stuck, it's often a cue to start playing. And it's as if play can actually open my mind again, actually help to reinvigorate the work that I'm doing.
Cool.
So cool. Yeah, so I love kind of setting up with Stuart Brown and this video, because it really shows how important play is to problem solving, figuring things out, and it seems like a natural fit for therapy. So Brown says that when we engage in fantasy play at any age, we bend the reality of our ordinary lives, and in the process germinate new ideas and ways of being. And there was this really fascinating study that I would love to see kind of how it translates, you know, since COVID in the world. And this goes back, it's, I don't know, maybe 15 years, but the hand and the brain need each other. The hand provides the means for interacting with the world, and the brain provides the method. And there is real scientific evidence that our brains react differently to three-dimensional objects than they do to two-dimensional representations on video or computer screens. So some research on fMRI brain imaging found that when a real hand holding a ball was shown through a window, the large areas of the brain's visual circuits were activated, and the associated circuits were also activated. But when a picture of a hand holding a ball was shown, the visual cortex demonstrated similar arousal. The associated areas were virtually silent. So that's very interesting in the world of our modern world now. So moving into play as therapy, Sweeney says, would any counselor attempt to establish a therapeutic relationship with a client who spoke a different language? I should hope not. It would be at best foolish and at worst unethical. But consider this: the counselor who employs traditional cognitive therapies might as well be speaking a foreign language when attempting to make contact with a child. The natural medium of communications for adults is verbalization, but for children, it is play. And, you know, Piaget, we all learned about Piaget in grad school. Piaget is a really big theorist with schools and teachers as well. And Sweeney kind of suggests with Piaget that play is an emotional laboratory for children and is crucial to their development. Through play, children learn about themselves, others, and the world around them. And that the pre-operational and concrete nature of children's cognition is incompatible with the formal operations of adult therapy. And that children under the age of 11 or 12 do not have the mastery of language and abstract thinking necessary to process and verbalize their thoughts. Piaget's research suggests that children are not developmentally able to engage in abstract reasoning until the age of 11. And this suggests that it's difficult, if not impossible, to reach children's emotions through verbal communication techniques. You know, it's not unusual for a parent to say to me, but my child's really smart. I don't really think they need play. They can talk. And I find that a lot of times parents want us to approach their child the same way that everyone else has tried to approach a child, through talk and reasoning. And it's important to remember that those approaches are kind of what landed them in our office in the first place. And abstract thinking, like, what is that, right? We're talking about abstract thinking and how children don't really develop it till about 11 or 12. And I will say start to develop it. Abstract thinking is using metaphors and analogies. It's understanding relationships between verbal and nonverbal ideas. It's spatial reasoning and like mentally manipulating and rotating objects. Like, I have a Kleenex box here. If I can like think about rotating that in my head, but I don't know that my 7 or 10-year-old would. It's also complex reasoning, such as using critical thinking, the scientific method, and other approaches to reasoning through problems. So, generally with play therapy, we think about, I guess in therapy in general, but especially play therapy, we're kind of in two field houses. We got the directive therapy and we have non-directive therapy. And so directive therapy is essentially, it is the therapist is active. The therapist leads or directs the play. The therapist has an agenda for the session, something they'd like to have integrated by the child. The therapist is in charge. They are the expert and they know what is best for the child. And Carl Rogers says that the paradigm of Western culture is that the essence of persons is dangerous. Thus, they must be taught, guided, and controlled by those with superior authority. Whereas non-directive, the therapist is also very, very active, but the therapist provides the conditions for and even encourages the child to take the lead. They believe in the child's innate ability to know what is best for their own healing, and the therapist enters the child's world rather than the child entering the therapist's world. And the idea of directive play does strike me as a little funny. I realize, going back to this slide a little, since kids are experts as play, and frankly, adults are not, like as a sand play therapist, like the kids will enter it in the sand and they know exactly what to do. But the adults that I work with who also do sand play, they're like, I don't really know what to do. Or, I have to give them a lot of like encouragement or instruction, never with the kids. So, and I think too, we have this real thing in therapy where like clinicians will say they're doing play therapy, but they'll just use the play tools as a distraction to get them to talk. And that's not play therapy. I had a mom come to me recently and she went to a therapist nearby that was recommended. She had this whole wall of toys and she was so excited because she wanted a play therapist. And she got in there and the therapist was like, oh, to the daughter, you can go ahead and go play with any of the toys on the wall. And then the therapist said to the mom, I just have them here to I don't really use them, but they're just kind of something for them to play with and distract. That is not play therapy. So play therapy is very, very specific. Yeah. So in the idea of entering the child's world, I'm going to lean on a great classic to illustrate the vibrant nature of the child's world. And that is Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are. I love this book. The words are so selective, and yet it says so much. It's lyrical. It's like poetic to me. And so for those of you that it's been a while or you don't know the book starts out with Max in his wolf suit, and he is causing a ruckus at the house, and he's chasing the dog, and he's running wild. And the mother's annoyed, and she yells at him to stop, and he tells her he's going to eat her up. And so she sends him to his room with no supper at all. And so I want to illustrate the world of the child with this book. So after mom sends him to his room, it says, that very night in Max's room, a forest grew and grew and grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through night and day. And I want to say this is such a good illustration of how great a book is. It has the power to whisk us away to a new world, whether that's Where the Wild Things Are, whether it's Hogwarts, whether it's Narnia, or a movie to a galaxy far, far away. Our job as play therapists is to get whisked away in the world of our child clients. I cannot express enough like the worlds that I've been whisked away to by entering the child's world versus having the child enter my world as an adult. So I'm reminded of a 3-year-old that I worked with when I worked in an inpatient psych unit facility. I had my play suitcase then, my mobile play therapy, and he was playing with the medical kit, and he looks up at me and he says, we got to hide all of this, referring to the medical kit tools. The police are coming. And my response matched his affect, an important tool with kids. My eyes got big. I whispered it back with great seriousness. We have to hide all of this. The police are coming. And he took the medical tools, and he moved them to the side as if to hide them. And I joined him as we hid behind my suitcase. It might help that I'm 5'2", but he told me a lot in that moment. He told me about his world. He told me about his home. He told me about his experiences, stuff I could have never gleaned from the hospital case file. And that's the value. I could have come in with the things to teach him, but he went into the reality of what's really going on. So we must remember, I feel, that we have to allow all parts of the children we work with into our therapy room, and that it might get wild. So another quote I want to kind of run over to is Louise Gurney. And she says that directive therapists structure and create the play situation, attempting to elicit, stimulate, and intrude upon the child's unconscious. Hidden processes or overt behavior by challenging the child's defense mechanisms, encouraging or leading the child in directions that are seen as beneficial. Non-directive therapists are actually controlled, always centered on the child and attuned to their communications, even the subtle ones. And the realization of selfhood via one's own map is the goal of non-directive play therapy. And Axland says, just as a plant needs sun and rain and good rich earth in order to attain its maximum growth, so the individual needs the permissiveness to be himself, the complete acceptance of himself by himself as well as by others, and the right to be an individual entitled to the dignity that is the birthright of every human being in order to achieve a direct satisfaction of this growth impulse. So moving into kind of the nuts and bolts of CCPT, again, we're going to start with Rogers, and that is, it is the client who knows what hurts, what directions to go, what problems are crucial, what experiences have been deeply buried. And so we're going to start with Virginia May Axline, who began as an elementary school teacher. She is sort of the forming mother of CCPT, if you will. And I think you have the 4 slide handouts, but if you have the 6th one, I made an error. She is the author of 2 groundbreaking books. One is Dibs in Search of Self, which is 1964, and Play Therapy, which is 1969. I had the wrong date down, so make sure your handouts reflect that accurately. Not a lot of women had that kind of high-level degree in 1969, and she earned her doctoral degree in 1950. And no doubt her background as an educator helped influence her respect for children. And you will see very clearly the Rogerian link here. She began collaborating with Carl Rogers when she became a graduate student at the Ohio State University. And she became one of Rogers' research associates at the University of Chicago Counseling Center. And she developed her own approach to child counseling following Rogers' principles that he set out for adults, but transferring the ideas to child clients. And this style of therapy became known as non-directive play therapy, which later became referred to as child-centered play therapy. So moving into the 8 basic principles of non-directive play therapy, they might seem kind of clear and basic and kind of already known, but I encourage you to look further, as remaining within these 8 is quite challenging. It takes a lot of attention, inner thinking, self-evaluation, and careful statements. It also really challenges our status quo in an era where we're really pressured to do something. And as I go through them, you'll see some overlap because they're all rather married together. So principle 1, establishing rapport. The therapist must develop a warm, friendly relationship with the child in which good rapport is established as soon as possible. So the therapist remains friendly, relaxed, and interested, with a high level of attunement, being present and focused with the child in the room. Something that you'll hear come up multiple times is the idea of avoiding praise, and that it's not conducive to therapy. And that praise touches on the child's desire to be good to be liked, to behave, or maybe their desire not to be any of those things. But this is really often how adults relate to kids, by praising the things they're doing well. And we must not just do this in our words, but also our actions and behaviors. In her book, she talks about an example of a child wanting the door to remain open. And she says that it's not just reflecting like you really don't feel comfortable with the door closed, you'd really like to leave it open. That's a great, child-centered way of talking about it. But she says that we must also respect it and keep the door open. So kind of going against maybe some of our desires, and doing some of those things that, might not be things we want to necessarily do. Principle 2 is accepting the child completely. The therapist accepts the child exactly as he is. And in this type of therapy, we come into the session with no expectations of the child to perform in a certain way. They may play or they may not play. They may hide or they may run amok. And so the therapist-child relationship is characterized by being steady, calm, and friendly. We are not to show impatience. We're, again, avoiding praise and criticism. So we avoid criticism here too. We need to show acceptance. And acceptance is not approval. We're not approving of maybe the behaviors that are kind of that would be kind of problematic in the outside world, but we're just accepting the child completely as they are and allowing all parts of themselves to be in the playroom. Our tone of voice, our facial expression, and even our gestures will either add or subtract from acceptance. Principle 3 is establishing a feeling of permissiveness. The therapist establishes a feeling of permissiveness in the relationship so that the child feels free to express his feelings completely. She says, you may play or not play as you like. And she says that ways that we can affect permissiveness is by giving a tour of the playroom. That one I can kind of understand a little bit, but she very much discourages against it. And frankly, most kids really don't need that anyway. They come and they get right to it. She says that encouraging a shy child to play would be affecting permissiveness. If water spills, she even suggests that cleaning up the water would be a problem with that. So it would be kind of cleaned up at the end of session by the therapist. Or even supportive interference. I caught myself doing this yesterday in a session where I kind of went to help with something and I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that, so stopping myself when I do that. It goes beyond words. It's important we return to the idea of nonverbal, how we are nonverbally, our facial expressions, our tone of voice, and our actions. And that the therapy hour is the child's hour to be used as he wants. You may play with these toys or you may not, it's really up to them. It seems that absolute permissiveness is a quote. It seems that absolute permissiveness, which is built upon complete absence of suggestion, is more conducive to successful therapy. And if the therapist is friendly toward the child and accepts his silence and idleness, she is conveying to him that she meant what she said and he really can do as he likes. I remember going to a daycare years ago to see a child, and she must have been 3 or 4, and she was coming to my session, and I was waiting for her in the class. And the Montessori school, this is a big part kind of what they do. She had this giant tub of like water and stuff, and she had to go carry it. And I started to move forward, like to help her. And I looked to my left and the teacher was there, and the teacher was just calmly standing there. And I was like, oh, I'm jumping up to help her. And I guess she doesn't need it. And so I watched her kind of, it was a little stumbly and, I was like a toddler almost carrying something big, but she did it. And there's that idea of trusting in the child's ability to do for themselves. And I think as the adult world, we're really kind of likely to jump in. So what she says is when he feels so secure, and I think there's a lot of he's here, you know, we're in the 60s here, but when he feels so securely accepted by the therapist that he can beat up the mother doll or bury the baby in the sand or lie down on the floor and drink from a nursing bottle, even though he is 9, 10, or 11 years old, and yet can do these things without a feeling of shame or guilt, then the therapist has established a feeling of permissiveness. He has gotten rid of the old feelings. He is ready for new ones. The experience brings to the child insight into his behavior. He understands himself a little better. He has gained confidence in himself. He is more capable of solving his own problems. He knows by experience that he can work things out for himself. So I love that quote. Okay, principle 4 is recognition and reflection of feeling. The therapist is alert to recognize the feelings the child is expressing and reflects those feelings back to him in such a manner that he gains insight into his behavior. So recognizing feelings versus interpreting feelings are two different things. Interpretation of feeling is a helpful tool, but cautious when you do that. Any feeling reflected from the play should be fairly obvious. So we shouldn't be making big jumps or big connections, she would say. And we should include the child symbol. So stay in the metaphor. You know, if we're playing with the doll and the doll's expressing sad feelings, we want to stay with that doll feeling the sadness versus taking it back to the child. It's safer to stay in the projection and in the symbol. I remember seeing a boy who was about 11, whose father was in jail. It was a domestic violence agency I worked at the time. And the mom would come in with him and he would be so quiet, standing next to the mom, and a lot of good reasons for that. Maybe he was trying to protect her. And the second she would leave, he would go into play. And even at 11, he did. And I remember he would go to my doll house. He went to my doll house and took out the dad figure, like the adult male. And he went to I had an art cabinet back then. He went to my art cabinet and he opened the door and he set the doll in there, the dollhouse doll. And he said, he's in jail. And so, that's important that we stay with, you could take a big leap and say, oh, you're feeling sad because your dad's in jail. No, that's not what we would do. We would stick with, he's in jail. Or if a figure in the dollhouse was upset and sad, the boy's really sad, that the dad went to jail. We want to stick with what they're doing. We don't want to bring it back to them. It would not be a good thing. It'd be too quick. It's too upfront. So keep in the projection. So if you get the wrong feeling, if you do kind of do some interpretation of feeling, and they will let you know. So they will correct you. So that's okay. Let them correct you and then correct your statement, but stay within that. And then that could be an indicator to kind of reconnect. So when interpreting feelings, be cautious and do so judiciously. Stay in the symbol of the child, stay in the projection. If the child is talking about the doll, stay with the doll. Do not transfer it to the child. And I actually wanted to read something from the book because it's such a good exchange, and it really kind of puts us in action that I love. And it's Jack. So it's a kind of lengthy exchange, but Jack is in a children's home. His parents are remarried. And the brother lives with the dad, but Jack is living in the home. And she doesn't go into any more explanation of what is going on there. But he goes home for a visit to see dad, and he comes back. And so he fills his mouth with some water, and he leans over and he spits it on the floor and says, "Look, I spit on my home." And the therapist says, "You spit on your home." And then Jack jerks off the nipple, fills his mouth again, and once more spits on the floor. And he says, I spit on my brother. I spit on my father. I spit right in their very faces. They wouldn't give me my toys. He broke my gun. I'll show them. I'll spit on them. Again and again, he filled his mouth with water and spat it on the floor. Therapist. You are very angry with your brother and your father. You would like to spit right in their faces because of the way they have treated you. Jack. They broke my gun. He went over to the drinking fountain and fills up the nursing bottle again and continued to spit on his father and brother. They had a new rug back home. Look, I'll spit on the rug. I'll get it all wet. I'll ruin it. And my brother's new suit, I'll spit on his new suit and I'll ruin that. Therapist. You'll ruin the new rug and the new suit. You'll get even with your father and your brother. And then Jack violently, I hate my father. I hate my brother. And therapist reflects. You hate your father. You hate your brother. Jack then sits down across from the therapist, suddenly very calm. He lowers his voice. He puts the nipple back on the bottle and begins to suck on it again. And Jack says, I didn't know how long I was going to stay with them when I went. I didn't take enough clothes with me. I stayed longer than I had planned. I never know. They never tell me. Therapist, you never know what to expect. You can't make plans for your visits unless they tell you how long you can stay. You didn't have enough clothes with you because they didn't tell you. And then Jack goes over and gets the father doll and he bangs its head down on the table. That for you. There. Therapist says, you'll beat him up. Jack, beginning to twist the father's head around. I'd laugh if his old head came off. And then he laughs. Therapist, you'd like it if his head got twisted clear off. Jack says, it would serve him right. He gave all my toys to my brother. He wouldn't let me bring them here. He broke my gun. And the therapist says, you don't think he treated you very nice. He took your toys and gave them to your brother. You want them. You want your gun too. And Jack throws the father doll clear across the room. I didn't take enough clothes to wear, and I had to wear dirty clothes, and I didn't get to bring back my toys. The therapist says, you had to wear old dirty clothes, and you didn't get what you want. You went after. And then Jack says, the dirty gypper. And therapist says, he gypped you out of what you think is yours. Really powerful excerpt. And then he goes on to play with clay. And one comment on clay, there's this whole power struggle over the clay and taking it home. I am a big believer that clay goes through. So if I have a client who makes something with clay, they take it. I don't keep it. I did a clay therapy training once, and I had it was like a huge time of loss for me. And I made these figures and I had to give them back. And it was not good. Like I really needed to take those home. So I'm a big believer, like recycle through the clay, just buy new clay, but that's a really powerful, upsetting kind of excerpt. But where else could like a child go and do that without, any other adult be like, oh, well, that's not nice, or put that down, or, oh, well, I'm sure that they didn't mean to, there would be all this stuff. But in this, she's not doing a lot, but he's going like, she's doing a lot, but he's saying so much that you wouldn't get, like that little boy, the 11-year-old, right? If I just sat him down and been like, how is it that your dad is in jail? He'd be like, I don't know. But these are kind of the ways that we can engage them and enter their world that I love. And you can see when you read it, he comes back, he calms back down. It returns back. They don't send him out wild or savage. He's able to return. So moving to principle 5, and that is maintaining respect for the child. The therapist maintains a deep respect for the child's ability to solve his own problems if given an opportunity to do so. And the responsibility to make choices and institute change is the responsibility to make choices and institute change is the child's. Change in behavior must come from within in order to have lasting change. It must come from one's own insight. And change is not conformity. Sometimes caregivers seek conformity, and conformity is not necessarily an indicator of adjustment. And CCPT helps the child realize he is responsible for himself. And the therapist believes that the child can help himself. She has respect for him. And here's a quote: "He lives through his experience, relaxed, secure in his relationship. It makes no difference whether he is a cooing baby or a bloodthirsty young savage. He still is completely accepted." And there's a example of this she gives of an 8-year-old boy who goes from drinking the baby bottle and being a baby to taking off the nipple of the bottle and drinking it and saying it's beer. He goes from aggressive play, where he plays out very aggressive themes, and it's fantasy based, and he keeps it with the toys, and then he ends back up in regular kind of 8-year-old conversation. And with this, I want to cite Brenna Hicks. She's wonderful. If you don't know about her podcast, go find it today. It's excellent. I like to have her in my ear. But she talks about, I believe it's her quote, she might be quoting somebody else, but she says, "Grant in fantasy what you cannot grant in reality." And that's a big part of play therapy. And it's important. Actually, I thought I had the summer, but I think it's like the play therapy podcast. I'm trying to remember. She has one for parents and one for children, but if you just search Brenna Hicks, you'll find it. But it's important to point out that acceptance and respect is not the same as approval. The therapist is simply present, demonstrating the be with attitudes. She's not approving maybe him, wanting to spit on the rug, but she kind of grants in fantasy what cannot happen in reality. And there's 8 sessions with this child, and it does indicate how much can happen. And it models how this led to increased independence and confidence in one's own ability for autonomy. So, principle 6, the child leads the way. The therapist does not attempt to direct the child's actions or conversation in any manner. The child leads the way. The therapist follows. Again, I told you there's a lot of overlap. And she also, again, discusses how we do no criticism, no praise, no suggestions at all, actually. And I'm really amazed at how kids can really solve problems more effectively than me. They just have better ideas if we just give them time to share it. The therapist asks no probing questions. And what she says you can ask is, "Would you like to tell me about it?" And I'm going to do another little reading excerpt. I hope that's okay. I just feel like sometimes that's the best way to kind of, illustrate this. So there's a boy named Richard, and he talks about wanting to fail. And she simply reflects. She doesn't try to change his mind or imply this is not being good or healthy. She doesn't try to question his feelings or assert that he should feel differently. She doesn't try to correct him. And this is a shorter excerpt. And I'm going to go to pages 121 to 122. All right. So Richard says, so Richard's 9. He's in a private children's home. It's interesting. He's been referred to therapy for daydreamer, bedwetter, and baby talk. Well, there's probably a lot more going on if he's in a children's home than those 3 things. But so Richard, "I've been pulling weeds to earn some money. I want to buy my mother a present. I'm going to go home on my birthday and spend 2 weeks with my aunt. She lives near my mother, and so I'll get to see my mother on my birthday." And the therapist says, "You're anxious to go and see your mother." There's a little bit of interpretation there. And Richard says, "Yes, I'll get her something nice. I'll surprise her with a nice present." Therapist, "You'll take her a nice surprise." Richard, "Yes, I'll be gone 2 weeks, maybe 3. Gosh, it'll be good getting out of here." Therapist, "You'll be glad to get away from here for a while." Richard, "I'll be 10 years old. I'm in 4th grade. My dad wants me to be in 5th grade, but I tell him I don't want to be in 5th grade. I like to fail." Therapist says, "You like to fail." Richard, "I wrote and told my mother I was coming home for my birthday. I told her I would be 5 years old and I wanted 5 candles on my cake." Therapist, "You want to be 5 years old this birthday." Richard, "Father's birthday is in the next month. He's going in the army. He came to see me last month. Know what he asked me? He asked me if I wanted a little brother or a little sister. I said I didn't care. They're going to get one, I guess. At this point, he paints black streaks across the orange and red blobs of color. So we see there's some expressive stuff coming out right there, right? Therapist, you told your dad you didn't care if they get another baby. Richard, that's what I said. Therapist, that's what you said. But you really do care. So there's a little bit of interpretation too. Richard, you see, my father and mother aren't any relation anymore. They're divorced and father is married again. He sighs deeply and closes the paint box with a bang. He goes over to the shelf and picks up the nursing bottle. He sucks on it. Me baby, he says. And therapist says, you could be their baby. A little bit of interpretation. But I love some of those exchanges because I think they're really good illustrations of therapists not criticizing, not praising, not suggesting, not correcting, not changing, not interjecting. It's purely allowing, and so much came out. He talked about so much that I don't think he would have gotten in a directive type of therapy. I think that can be more shutting down. So yeah, so I love how she illustrates so much of this. And so Axon says the therapist is not a playmate. She is not a teacher. She is not a substitute mother. She's a very unique person in the eyes of the child. She is the sounding board against which he can try out his personality. She is the one who holds a mirror so that he can see himself as he is. The therapist keeps her opinions, her feelings, her guidance out of the therapy hour. Principle 7. Therapy cannot be hurried. The therapist does not attempt to hurry the therapy along. It is a gradual process, and it is recognized as such by the therapist. She says, quite often children pass through a period of seemingly uneventful play during the therapy hour. Such a period calls for patience and understanding on the part of the therapist. Some children are very slow to make use of the hour in what the therapist might consider a therapeutic manner. However, they may be going through a period wherein they are gaining the readiness to express themselves. If the therapist can just let them alone, let them take their time, she will be rewarded for her strength. So, says the 1960s therapist to the modern therapist, managing measurable goals and managed care. And if only we had still had those same freedoms. But in all fairness, Gary Landreth would say that big things can occur in smaller time frames. And as sand play training suggests, when time is limited, the psyche can really kick in and do serious work. But this is challenging for us, right? We're feeling a lot of pressure to write the case note and do something. So she says, remember, the child lives in a hurried world. Children are slow by nature, yet are continually rushed about. And the child needs time to observe the world and take it in. And it can be kind of confusing how these kind of simple steps can create deep change. And it's really about trusting the process, which can be hard. I remind myself about my own internal pressure to perform. I remind myself of this, like when my pressure builds up in myself, especially with a parent that's frustrated. But, I have a story from when I was in my internship as a grad student, and I really didn't know what I was doing right. I mean, we're just figuring it out. I had this she was a 12 or 13-year-old African-American female, and she was from a pretty tough neighborhood. And it was tough. She sat that first session and she didn't say a word. And I was like, oh my God, I just felt kind of inept. I was this white female, she came from a really hard place. And I just felt like, oh, she must think like this lady can't even relate to me, right? So I sat there that session. I kind of joke. I don't know if anybody's seen Good Will Hunting, but I'm like, I Good Will Hunted her, like I sat there kind of quietly with her. At the time, I kind of did a little paperwork while we were sitting. I would not do that today. I would sit there more, present. But Axlin in her book, I think, says that kind of stuff's okay, but I wouldn't do that now. I was just kind of figuring things out then. And I wasn't sure. And the next session, she showed up and she did therapy and she talked, and I was shocked. And then I was even more shocked because I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. I was trying to do more child-centered stuff. I was shocked to hear that her behaviors had turned around like 180 degrees. Her grades went up. She was flourishing. Her coach stuff that her sport was going well. The coach was happy. And the mom loved me, apparently. I didn't know this. And then I had a colleague working with her sister, and she was upset because the sister wasn't making the same progress. And my colleague was awesome. She was a great student. I think she was more directive, and who's to know, who's to say, what exactly happened there. But it was very surprising. And when we were done with therapy, she brought me this gift that she had made in shop class. And I was just puzzled. But I think sometimes just being that present, non-directive person is helpful in a world where kids are just being told what to do all the time. So I believe we can trust the process while also keeping our files in good order for a possible insurance audit. So remember that change is gradual and that some children move at a snail's pace. So the child will need time to get their equilibrium in therapy. The child will notice the absence of the hurriedness and relax. And Axline also suggests that when we're feeling stuck or we're feeling like there's no progress, to just reflect and look at the notes. But mostly, most importantly, remember, therapy doesn't always bring about the desired results. Child progress will happen. I also believe that it may not necessarily match what the parents view as progress, but that doesn't mean that it was not effective. And also it's not a cure-all. I had a couple foster kids, that were doing great stuff in play therapy, doing a lot of trauma work, but their behaviors were, increasing, but I don't think that was due to me. They were working on reunification. They were about to leave a 4-year foster home of great stability. One of them, that's all they'd really known. And, there were some sexual acting out behaviors popping up. And so, life is happening all around the therapy process too. And sometimes there's problems happening outside and we're not going to be able to fix that. We can work through it, but we're not necessarily given the right amount of time or it needs more time. So that's just a reality too. I think it's important to keep in mind. All right. Last principle, principle 8, and that is the value of limitations. The therapist establishes only those limitations that are necessary to anchor the therapy to the world of reality and make the child aware of his responsibility in the relationship. The therapy hour must not be so divorced from an everyday life situation that there's no carryover outside of the playroom. Limits are very few, yet very important. And we only talk about the limits when the limits get broken. We don't start with limits. We only deal with them in the moment. So limits are important for willful destruction of play materials, damaging the room, attacking the therapist, and common sense measures to protect the child. Adhering to the time limits of the clinical hour is necessary and helps integrate the limits of time. So one of the things I want to say is it talks about in the literature that if a child leaves the room, he should not be allowed to return. But it does clarify that it's more of a child who's being bored, stubborn, or angry. I don't actually agree with that. I had a kiddo checking in with his mom a few times yesterday. It actually was kind of therapeutic because I think he started playing a little bit of a game of peekaboo with her, which has an attachment value to it. So I'm not quite that rigid. It also says that we shouldn't let them leave to the bathroom. And I I disagree. I allow bathroom breaks without any repercussions. Axline and Van Fleet both discuss this, but I allow it. I will get more into this hopefully later, but a brief mention that this makes sense to me. If we're having an emotional release, we're emotionally releasing, that might convert to a physical release. So when I see them go to the bathroom, I often think of that connection. And I'm not getting in the way of, I feel like that gets into a parent role, and I'm not doing that. So, and I also think that leaving session can be a little bit about containment and healthy coping. I think what she's getting at is leaving is being used in an acting up way, and then that would be different. Then I would give a warning and a second warning and then end session. We're going to talk about that in a minute. When I have had to end a session, I only had to do it once. Like the next time they come back, they don't do it. So they like to stay in the play therapy session. They don't want to lose it. And she says, most importantly, limits cannot be a pressure device that violates these 8 principles. So I realized I better rush through some of this. I got about 30 minutes left. So I want to move over to Gary Landreth. He is an internationally known educator and author. He is founder and director emeritus with the Center for Play Therapy out of UNT in Denton, Texas. He is a UNT Regents professor. Everybody knows Landreth, more than 150 journal articles, books, and videos, a Lifetime Achievement Award, Research Award. If Axon's the mother of CCPT, we can say Landreth is the father. And I'm going to share this because this is a perfect way to set limits. He talks about it, Axon and him talk about a child needs a certain amount of control. He is not entirely self-sufficient. So how this works is so we acknowledge a child's feeling and desire. Billy, I know that it would be fun to shoot me. C, communicate the limit, be clear and specific, but I am not for shooting. T, target acceptable alternatives. You can pretend that the doll is me and shoot at it. So it's kind of a 3-step, real concrete way to do it that I love that he's created for us. Yeah, and some of this you'll find he did the child-parent relationship therapy. I've been lucky enough to have gone to his training on that. That's the great thing about play therapy. The masters are alive and well, and we can go see them. But he also wrote that book with a few other people. Let me see if I can find them here. It's Bratton. I'll get to it in a minute. It's not showing up right now. But anyway, let me move to the next one. So she says that the therapist is helping the child to face the problem of adjustment to a realistic world. It seems as though it would be more of a help to the child to let him face the limitations that human relationship will force upon him than to let him give free rein to destructive actions. So I want to jump also over to this. Hold on, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to skip over that example just because we're running a little low on time. So the Child-Centered Play Therapy book by Rise Van Fleet and these additional authors talks about kind of another way of approaching it. So there are 3 steps: is stating the limit, giving a warning, and enforcing the consequence. So she's a little different than Landreth. And I like her approach too. And I think a hybrid's nice. So I'm just going to teach them both and you can kind of decide what you like. So she always uses the child's name. And then, so that is a different part. And then instead of saying, but you can shoot the doll and pretend like it's me, she says that steps out of the non-directive place into a directive place because we're giving the child a suggestion. So what she likes instead is, but you can do just about anything else. And so it might look like this. So this is the one she uses. Annie, you'd like to shoot me with a dart gun. You would like to shoot the dart gun at me. Remember, I said I'd let you know if there's something you may not do. One of the things you may not do here is point or shoot the dart gun at me when it's loaded, but you can do just about anything else. So it's a little wordy. I kind of shifted it over a little because so I kind of suggested maybe Annie, you'd like to shoot the dart gun at me. One of the things you may not do is point or shoot the dart gun at me, but you can do just about anything else. So there's a slight difference between Landreth. I think they're both excellent. But she kind of gives us like a three-phase warning for like ending the session. So that would be her first point. And if there's another violation, she does this. She says, Annie, remember I told you that you could not point or shoot the gun at me when it's loaded? If you point or shoot it at me again, we will have to end the playtime today. And then enforcing the consequence, she says, no negotiation. She says, Annie, remember I told you if you pointed the dart gun at me again, we would have to leave the playroom today? Since you chose to point it at me again, we have to leave now, right now. And that's when she would end her session. So kind of this is her formula, child's name. One of the things you may do is blank, but you can do almost anything else. Okay. So I have a video of Landreth. Maybe I can take I want to say that the therapist realizes the non-directive therapy is not a panacea. She admits that like all things, it too has its limitations. So I'm wondering about a little quick poll. I have a 7-minute video of Gary Landreth. But we're getting a little lower on time. So I'm wondering, would you guys like to see that and try to squeeze everything in and maybe cut down on the questions a little, or would you like the link emailed to you instead?
Perfect. Okay.
I'm saying a majority for emailed.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I will put it in the chat as well, so you guys can copy it over, and then we will we'll send that out as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the last one. And it's just Gary Landreth doing a play therapy session, the last 5 minutes with a little girl. And it's just so nice to see like actual examples. So yeah, I think that would be great. I'm wondering about pausing just a couple minutes just to see if there's any questions before I jump over to the miniature playroom.
Yeah, if this is a good time, if you feel like this is a
Great.
decent place, then we can certainly do that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Jordan, we did have some reflections in the chat, just especially when you were talking about kind of the urge to hurry up sessions, right?
Yes.
And so kind of thinking about maybe how to handle that when it's parent or guardian directed as well, of like, let's get things over with.
I was specifically going to ask that because I clocked that too. Like, do you have any resources or ideas for like how to kind of communicate with the parents, both sort of what the expectations are for child-centered play therapy, as well as maybe to kind of help? Because I know, yeah, in my experience too, that parents tend to be like, it's 3 sessions. Why is it nothing?
Yes.
You know, why has nothing happened yet? Kind of a thing. So
I just had that. So what I do is I see a child for 5 sessions and then I do a parent session. So I am very, very involved with the parents. I need them to understand what's going on. I need to know what's going on at home, and I need to give like resources and support of things to try. I mentioned Brenna Hicks. She has some amazing podcasts for parents, and I have used some of those podcasts to give to parents to work on some of the skills. She also did a great blog that I got the other day, like, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago. And she compared it to sports. You know, I have 3 girls and they're like in gymnastics, right? I think it took my girls like 8 months to get past level 1 into level 2. And so, you know, it's not, you know, parents are very much understand that sports take a while to build. 11 football practices is not going to make you really good at football. And so I think that kind, and I have to credit Brenna Hicks with this analogy. I think that is a really good analogy because parents really understand sports. I mean, it's always like the thing that can sometimes get prioritized over therapy. And, you know, I say it's not going to take, don't worry, it's not going to take 8 months to get to level 2, like my kids in gymnastics, but it is a process and it takes time. And so I think that analogy has been helpful. And then I think meeting with them regularly, you've got to, like, yeah, Brenna says, the kids are our clients, but the parents are our customers. And so we have to really engage the parents, and we have to really talk through things and explain and giving them resources. Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
I felt that was helpful. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. It's a hard one because they want quick answers, they want quick change, but change is not necessarily quick. I mean, I've had some clients where like overnight it was like, oh, okay, this is the problem, but that's like it's like a magic wand case. Those are really not the norm.
Well, and I know you mentioned it earlier in the training too, but the fact that there is a societal shift in how pressured everything is now too. So it's kind of working uphill. I mean, both for us as therapists, but also as for parents, because they've been conditioned in that way too.
Yeah. And I think the weekly therapy is so important too. If they're going to come every other week, then they can expect it to be twice as slow, I tell parents I need to see them weekly. It's not like adults, like where we can go every other week, that's fine. But with kids, we need that consistency.
Any other questions? I know there's a lot kind of anxious to get into how to apply all of this in those teeny spaces. Oh, there are a few. And you may be jumping into some of these as well, Jordan, but some other questions, kind of more logistical of how do you display your toys? And so when a child walks in, I know one of the principals kind of talked about how to help them acclimate to the room, but are they sitting out within the child's reach? If not, how do you offer them the option of reaching something they can't physically reach or access? As well as
I'll jump in on that real quick. All my stuff is out. And I have a lot of stuff because I have a big office. I have my dream office now. So there is stuff up high. Some of the kids will jump on my table, my art table, and grab stuff. That's fine. I don't feel like that's a safety concern. I mean, if it was, I would work with that, but I have a really strong, sturdy step stool and I let them know they want to get something out. I can help, or I can bring out the stool for them.
Excellent. And another question, kind of going back to determining the limitations of child-centered play therapy, and how do you determine that if they're not serving the child? So when those limitations aren't serving the child.
You mean like the ACT limitation, or?
I think it's speaking more to like. Sorry, Colleen.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this one is speaking more towards like, when you're in therapy, say you've gotten through 5, 8, more sessions, how do you determine that it's not a good fit, or that if there is a time when it's maybe not a good, like how that all kind of works through.
I don't know that I'd say it's not a good fit. I haven't really had that experience. I think that's more of the directive therapies that really turn into not good fits. I can't say, I don't think I've had a class. I mean, there are certain types of populations I don't work with, like sex offending populations or like autism spectrum. I do a lot of trauma, a lot of things like that. So yeah, I think it's a really good fit. It's crosses cultures, it crosses all sorts of diagnoses. The research is really strong on it.
Let me
I might look to myself and say, okay, what might I maybe not be doing? Or, if it's maybe one of those populations I don't work with. Yeah.
So as a follow-up to that, Jordan, kind of some more information. So maybe working, kind of asking that from the perspective of a provider who's working with certain populations. So in this example, maybe kids and teens with eating disorders or other presenting issues where some of the more kind of general limitations of CCPT specifically might not best serve what they need.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important to refer out, and there's, limitations. Like I wouldn't probably take on an eating disorder case because I'm not trained in it. So the types of therapies, the types of populations I take on, it's a great fit for. But yeah, it's really important to know, like what your limitations are and what, and to refer on to other providers.
So, and I do kind of want to have a follow-up question to that. So on the same kind of vein, would you say that in your experience, the times that maybe it did not quote unquote work out tend to be more like external factors, like the parents or scheduling issues, or like you said, where I don't have maybe the training on this specific subset that I'm okay.
Yeah. I mean, often it's because, things are being disrupted. And at least with the populations I work with, I don't really work with some of those other specialty groups. I would refer on. Although, it's tough too, because like, there's not a lot of providers for children.
No, there's not.
So if I have a 6-year-old, I don't know how the eating disorder, therapists are and working with 6. So I think there's a real problem there, right? And like referral sources, even in the Chicago area, like there's really very few of us.
I know it is absolutely an issue here in Iowa specifically. A lot of the more kind of specialties tend to be in bigger cities. And then if you're in a rural area,
and kids that are older. So so with my populations, it works really well. I don't know that it would with some of those other populations though, right? We need sort of possibly a different approach. I don't know.
And I think some other feedback too of the kind of the general principles and of CCPT and being kind of challenged by other professionals that it may not be helpful, specifically with this example here of gifted kids with anxiety and kind of being told you should be doing something like CBT because they're so articulate, and thinking back to what where we start this training.
And I think that would be a great place to do this stuff with, right? That would be a great population. And there's a ton of, we got this here. There is a ton of research now on CCPT. It finally has it's been around since '69. I think when I first entered the field, like in 2005, I had a camouflage that I was doing play therapy. I had to use other words in my Medicaid notes in Missouri. Now it has the crown of evidence base bestowed on it, which you can hear some sarcasm about, right? Like, I'm glad we did not use it for the last 50 years. But so there is a lot of strong research. But maybe we can hold the next questions till the end. Is that okay? Just to squeeze in the next part? Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Let me get to, okay. So material selection. How do we do this? What do we need? Okay. So the mobile playroom, according to Axline. So as we know, sorry, make sure I'm in the right place on my notes now. So as we know, they want child therapists. They give us the adult office. We have to share it. So good space is hard to find. Communal playrooms are not ideal. CCPT needs consistency. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be predictable. You need access to toys. And this is not a given. And it may be checked out that day when you have that client and that, I'm sorry, we can't use the playroom today. What are we going to do? Right? Like that's a problem. So, and those kind of rooms are not usually fitted by a child-centered play therapist, whether it is a registered play therapist. So it's usually not what it needs to be. And then any clinician can use it. So then you've got issues with things being put back. Is it clean? Are my supplies empty? Will they be there? So there's a lot of problems I feel with that. And frankly, I spent a lot of money on my toys. I don't want to share them. An EMDR therapist, I remember having one years ago with a light bar. She's not going to share that. Why would I need to share mine? So it leaves particular problems for us. So I love her 13-item playroom because it's so easy. I did this in a suitcase. You could do it in a bin. You could do it in a box. Gary Landers talks about a box. So let's start with that. So first and foremost, we need a doll family. And with that, what I want to say about the doll family is it's really important to think about multicultural dolls in your play stuff. So you definitely want a white family, you definitely want a Black family. You're working with a lot of Latino families. You want a Latino doll family, you want an Asian doll family. So you really have to think about the population you work with. If you work with people with disabilities, you want to find dolls that reflect that. I have a disability set in my sand play collection. It's like somebody in a wheelchair. Actually, Barbie has a wheelchair. I have that wheelchair. Our generation dolls have a wheelchair. So it's really, really important that your dolls reflect your population. I have found it harder to get boys in the doll collections. It's so much easier to find the girls. So you want the grandparents. I think you want, parents, children, babies. You want the gamut, and really think about multicultural. They need to see themselves in the dolls they are playing with. This was really hard 20 years ago. Like even the Black baby dolls were more like white with dark skin. They've gotten better. So we're in the better era for access to multicultural dolls. But I tell you what, Asian dolls, that was really hard for me to find good ones in my sand play collection. So I think but yeah, we really, really, really have to think about that. Even if all your clients are white, have some other dolls anyway. My daughters, I bought them, our generation dolls that are Black, and it's just important to have representation, period. I didn't want my girls to just be surrounded by a white world. Furniture, also to match the scale of the doll family that they fit into, is really important. Nursing bottles, so important. Multiple nursing bottles. You need spares. Because when they put them in their mouth, you need to wash them. They talk about having different nipples. I just wash them. And so, if I have multiple kids in one day, I could go through multiple nursing bottles, and then I take them home and I wash them. So have spares. And I say, and make them real. Have real nursing bottles, because they will want to fill them with water, some of them. I have a fridge in my office, and the kids can get like juice or water. I talk to the parents about what's okay, and they love to put the lemonade in the bottle. So that's really, really important. Clay, as I mentioned before, let them take their clay creations home. There's Sculpey, which you can like bake in the oven, and it turns kind of plasticky and firm, and then they can come back and paint it. I've had a little bit of trouble with Sculpey lately, though, in holding up and breaking apart. So I think I might shift over to air dry clay. Although Sculpey baked clay is so it's not messy. It's kind of oily feeling, but it's not messy. Whereas some of the air dry clay will be more messy. I just play around with brands. I just got one from TJ Maxx, and it's a nightmare. It's so messy and like it was like paint on the kids' hands. So I love Craft Smart air dry clay. It works. It looks like clay. It dries hard. It's fantastic. So drawing paper. You can, I think any size is okay. Sometimes it's nice to have bigger sheets, but if you're in a mobile playroom, it's not really an option. Just get your letterhead size stuff. Crayons are very important. They say paint. I'm a little on the fence on paint. I would not do paint in a mobile play. If I'm going into schools or daycares or homes, it's a lot of cleanup. It's hard. I personally would scratch the paint for more, unless they did a clay project and I need to bring it in for them to paint their clay project. That's my 2 cents on that. And washable paint, by the way, if you do paint, that can be really important, although it's not as nice. You'll see the difference in the medium. All right. Toy soldiers. These are very important. These get a lot of play. I would say make sure to have 2 different color soldiers. So there's like brown and light green, or light green and dark green. So we want a couple different sides, for toy soldiers. It's a very good aggressive type of toy. A toy gun. There is team pro guns, team anti-gun. I am purely toy gun team. Can't talk about it now. There's too much. But if you do, make sure it is very fake looking. Make sure it does not look like a real gun at all. And I want to throw in there, I don't know if you're going into schools nowadays, if you want to include this, or if you want to think about a different solution for this. And I just want to throw that out because I did not go into schools in the current era, and I realized it could bring in some complications. So I just want to acknowledge that. Toy car for sure. A couple, I think a few is probably smart. Puppets. Folkman puppets are amazing. They're pricey and they're so amazing though. I started with a lamb, which is a very passive kind of one, an alligator, which is aggressive, a raven, which is kind of black and dark, kind of depressing, and then a snow owl. So 12, a ragdoll baby, she says. I have never had a ragdoll baby. I have had a regular baby doll, and plastic can be good because it's easy to clean. It dries well if it gets wet. I have, by the way, again, multiple races of babies. You know, we want white, we want black, you know, you're working Latino, Asian, make sure your baby dolls match. But I had a client who had a sex abuse history when I was doing home therapy a long time ago. And she asked me for soap. And I remember this session, she had lived in like an apartment complex, like a 4 flat in the city. And I was driving to her house and I stopped to get her soap at like the dollar store. And I don't know how we got water in I brought a tub, like a little plastic bin. And I don't know how we got water. It must have gotten it from this hose. I can't remember. But I brought that baby and she washed that baby. I bought like an entire bottle of like body soap because that's what they had on my route to her house that day. She used the whole bottle. And we know with sexual abuse, there's a lot of stuff around cleanliness and cleansing. And so again, we need to follow our kids' lead. So if they ask for something, I try to accommodate it. And this is actually how sand tray therapy was created. Margaret Lowenfeld in England had a sand tray here, little toys over here. One of the children took a little toy, threw it in the sand tray, and that was the birth of sand tray therapy. She was smart enough to know, ooh, this is something, and to go with the child in a very child-directed way. So be open to things. And then telephones. I have some old-fashioned ones in my office. But yeah, telephones are very, very important. So, and I have this horse picture here because at the time, this is a few years ago, all my girls were really into our generation dolls. Those are like the Target brand of American Girl dolls, the ones that you can afford. I can afford. And they all had their own horse. So they went at the barn and that barn was like $85. And I was like, no. So I made this barn out of a repurposed Amazon box in the time it took me to boil a hot dog. So we can get real creative. And Gary Landreth talks about just using the cardboard box and putting in like a T-shaped kind of thing for the rooms of the dollhouse. So yeah. So it needs to be consistent and predictable. Make sure the materials are always there and they're in good shape. Replace them when they're compromised. Replace your crayons, get new ones. Avoid stuff that makes noise or is mechanical. This is a problem in my office. Kids are very disappointed when my stuff does not make noises, but that is a recommendation. And keep other client projects out of the waiting room. This is kind of a confidentiality issue that we want to stay away from. And then I think it's also an influencing one. If a kid sees something hanging up or another kid's art, they might try to emulate it and it can affect their process. So it's HIPAA stuff, really. The center, the University of North Texas, this comes from their website. I'm going to try to zoom through these real quick, sorry. Therapeutic toy categories for the playroom. They have real life and nurturing, the doll baby, the doll family, the doll house, the baby bottle, puppets. Animal families are, so this is, the first one was your basics. This is if you want to elaborate a little. Animal families, they say money, cash register, kitchen food, medical kit. Medical kit's really important if you're working with kids with medical stuff, if you're in a hospital setting, right? Although I have kids use it all the time that don't have that either. Kitchen food is great. I have a kitchen in my office, not possible in a small office. So in lieu of that, I would say get yourself a good tea set, a little tea set. Acting out in aggressive toys. These are kind of what I've already kind of mentioned. I like the ropes too. I get a little rope from like Lowe's. They can cut you a strand. Handcuffs. These are important. And then creative expression materials, like we've kind of talked about. Again, this is next level. But one of the things he says, toys should be selected and not collected. And I think that's really important. I have included in your handouts the CPRT list that they have parents buy for the child-parent relationship therapy, the CPRT. It also fits in a bin. I made that bin once. And this is done by Sue Breton, Gary Landreth, Teresa Kellum, and Sandra Blackard. And so that is also another great one. They use like a blanket to lay out to kind of set the stage. And then they set out all the toys around the blanket and they set it up. And then the child comes in and then they leave. So, and I just want to jump ahead really quick to cleaning because I want to make sure we talk about cleaning really quick. We never have the child clean ever. It reinforces for multiple reasons. It reinforces the special nature of the playroom. They may not play the way they need to if they feel they have to clean it up. The final appearance of your playroom shows the work and how it represents the therapeutic work they did. Telling them to clean up is like telling them to take back all that they have said. It invalidates the work. It is therapist driven and steps outside of child directed. They cannot be expected to know where things go. And then if they refuse, it turns into kind of a power struggle and takes us again out of child-centered play therapy. So I just want to throw that in before I forget. And then I want to jump into Van Fleet, who I don't think we're going to get to the 4 things today, but it's a lot of overlap, so don't worry. She says that they need to be safe for children, right? So I remember one of my families switched the styrofoam cups for the solo like pilot cup, like the red plastic cups in the CPRT list. It's not good because then it turns into kind of a weapon. If you break those, it's sharp. So, styrofoam is why that's there. For example, when I mentioned the tea set, you want to do a plastic tea set. You don't want to do anything ceramic that's going to break when you're out running around. She also says you need to find tools that encourage the expression of feelings and play themes and allow for imaginative play and projection. So I once heard a sand tray therapist say that for adults, you don't need like all the younger kid toys in your sand collection. And I about had a heart attack because every adult was once a child. We are wounded in our childhood often, and so my adult clients all the time use the kid stuff in the sand tray because we were all kids. And, if you're wounded at 4, at 2, at 6, you're going to use stuff from that developmental time frame. And the same is true for our kids. Like you've got a 10-year-old and yeah, it feels kind of silly to have baby stuff. We need baby stuff, just like you saw in the book, right? We have this 10-year-old who is regressing. And that's an important part of the work. That's actually an important phase and stage of play therapy. And they need to have that expression because we don't know where the hurt happened. And so Van Fleet also has these categories in her book. These are next level up. These would be for like if you have a really nice size area for toys, but you can always reference it too to see if, and they're in pages 50 to 52 of that book. Yeah. And privacy considerations. I'm going to try to go super fast to get through this. When we're in schools and daycares and homes, it's tough. I had a little 4-year-old once at a daycare and she went to fill up the baby bottle right outside the room they gave us. And a teacher came by and she said, "Oh, you're a big girl. You don't need that. You don't need a bottle." And, I kind of was like, kind of cringed, But this intrusion is tough when you're in mobile play therapy situations. So I had to deal some fixing when we got back into the play therapy space, but like, she was well-meaning, right? She wants to encourage kids to wean off their bottles. I'm sure that's a struggle at the daycare. It's a very awesome daycare that one was that I was at. So it was upsetting for me. So I had to work on some correction. And so you could say something like, in our special playtime, anyone who would like to use the bottle, whether they're babies or big kids or even adults, can use the bottle. So sometimes we have to, when things like that happen, we can just reframe and recollect. Van Fleet says that in the absence of privacy, you can try to create boundaries like bookshelves, separating your space. It's tough though, like when you're in a different person's area, because then like the kids might want to grab onto the stuff there and we're not really allowed to, right? Because it doesn't belong to us. So there are some issues at homes. This can be challenging. Setting boundaries with the family about private space. Bedrooms, you might be asked to do therapy in bedrooms and basements, outside in the family room. It's very challenging. I did not always handle this well when I was beginning because I didn't have any guidance. And I remember doing some sessions in bedrooms with kids and knowing it wasn't great, but also knowing that like it was sort of the option and where else is it going to be? But as a woman, I have some special privilege there, don't I? For a male, that, it's probably not a great thing, like you may not like that. I may not choose that again at this stage in my career. But sometimes we're caught off guard by the element of surprise when we're out in these situations. And we just we go with the flow and we think about it and we think it through and we make corrections. With schools and daycare offices, I usually have my own space, but again, traffic. You might have somebody come in the middle of and interrupt the session and go get something. An inpatient facility, sometimes I was stuck in the break room and people would come by to get something from their purse. So these are the real challenges that I think are helpful to think through. Yeah. I remember spilling sand out once in the middle of a hallway at a school. It was a nightmare. Thank God the custodian was so nice about it. But yeah, there's a lot of challenges that can kind of come your way. So this is sort of my representation of the importance of cleaning. And Rice says that a cluttered or very messy playroom can add too much to children's anxiety as the disorganization resembles the chaos in their lives. And yet, on the other hand, the playroom need not and should not be perfectly tidy. So they're sort of somewhere in the middle. But it's really important to think those things through. And this is sort of my slide about making sure you're at the child's level. There is a height differential, there is an authority differential, and the more we can come in on the kids' level, the better. I will talk to them standing on my knees. I sit on the floor to play. I move out of their way, so I'm not obstructing the flow if they're moving for another toy. So just be conscious of your body and how to make it a little more egalitarian. And I'll probably have to end there to questions. We kind of got through all the objectives that I had outlined. I had some extra material I threw in just in case. But yeah, so everything in the training is here. It's just, there's some extra slides.
Unfortunately, sometimes with the really good trainings that happens, you get into it and you start talking and you're like, oh crap, I'm out of time.
Yeah, I never know with this. I was trying to time it. I'm like, oh, we'll just see. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I said we did have one question in the chat, kind of going back to the cleaning.
Yes.
Any suggestions if the child wants to clean up or begins to, even when I say they don't have to?
Good question. I just had this yesterday. I had several kids yesterday. Several things happened yesterday. I'm like, oh, that's helpful for the presentation. Okay, so what the child-centered play therapists say is, it's child-centered. So if they want to clean up, we don't get in the way. I do say things like, in here in the special playtime, you never have to clean up. I always do the cleaning up, and then they might continue to do it. And then I'll say something like, oh, you really want to put that away still? You would really like to clean that up, So I would do something like that. I like to continue to kind of remind them, I had one kid I told that to, and he's like, yeah, and then yesterday he's cleaning up. I'm like, oh, so, and, I sometimes will say, and here the rules are kind of different, at school, it's really important to clean up, and at home it really is. But here it's so different, I actually really like cleaning up. I mean, I hate cleaning, but I like cleaning up my therapy sessions because it's such an important, because you imagine like as a therapist being on the couch and you're at the end of your hour and your therapist is like, here's my lint roller. Can you clean off that where you were sitting? And here's a Lysol wipe. I'm going to clean off where your drink was, like, or vacuum under their feet. We wouldn't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, let's see, any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody coming and listening. I was trying to fit in a lot of content and didn't quite get to it all, but I really think that Brenna Hicks podcast, I would start listening to it today. It's just such a good reminder. I always just need reminders. Even going through some of the material, I'm like, oh, I've been doing that a little off. I got to tweak that, or yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought today was super. It was super informative from the child perspective, but then before the training started, I had told you that I see kind of the gamut of ages. And for me, it was really interesting because, and you brought it up several times about how, just because we are adults doesn't mean we don't need play, or that we don't have that inner child, or we don't have those things. And so for me, I'm very much kind of attachment based. And so it was interesting going through and being able to see it from the child perspective, but then also from the adult perspective, and kind of have to interact. So
yeah, and that attachment piece is so important. And that's why I sort of like, she was talking about how they can't leave the playroom. But yesterday's session, I saw it as really attachments-based stuff with mom. And I had no issue with it. I thought, this is really therapeutic. He's letting me know something here. He's wanting to engage with mom, and I don't want to get in the way of that, right? To me, that would be jumping into adult centered. So I did have to set a limit because he was starting to roll all my stuff into my very small waiting room. Like, the toys need to stay in here. But yeah, I think sometimes you just have to, as long as it's really grounded in the foundational theory, you kind of have to go also with your intuition at times. That's my big belief.
Absolutely.
I say, so that is the end of today's training. I want to thank you again, Jordan, for coming and speaking with us and giving us all of this great information. For anyone who might be interested in looking into more information on what Jordan offers, or other training opportunities, things like that, we do have the link that we'll be sharing also, and it's aplacewithincounseling.com. That's Jordan's website. And then she also did mention, for anyone who might be interested, that if you want to go to that website about potentially having some play therapy supervision, she is also open to that as well.
As Maggie said, thank you all again for being here. Those links are there. When you complete your CE quiz, you'll get an email, and the top body of that email is a password. You'll just copy and paste it. It's a HIPAA compliant platform. So it'll ask for that password to download your certificate. If you run into any issues, send us an email. Maggie and I will stay on this link until everybody else logs off, in case anybody runs into any hiccups. But again, thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Maggie, for hosting. Thank you, Jordan, for your wonderful presentation. And don't forget that you need a training.
Thank you for joining in on today's training. We look forward to having you join us again. Heart & Solutions is proud to provide CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below.